concern from the white book with how they wrote something. I literally highlighted it in red and wanted to bring it to your attention.
But welcome to our first DADD community chat of 2021. Thank you so much for joining us and spending your Friday afternoon with us. I am Jenny Root, and I am one of the members at large for DADD. And we have two other board members with us, so I'll let them introduce themselves. Liz?
I'm Liz Harkins. I'm the other member at large for DADD.
I'm Megan Carpenter, and I'm the student representative for DADD.
All right, and today we'll be talking about how to support secondary students with autism and intellectual disability during COVID. And so I'm very excited to have some panelists here. So if you haven't joined us for one of our community chats yet, it's pretty informal. And so I've prepared a couple of questions to talk with our panelists about first, and then we will open it up to the whole group. And depending on how many of us are here, we may break out into smaller groups. Sometimes it's easier to chat in that format. And we have one more panelist we're waiting on, so hopefully I'll watch for him in the waiting room and we'll introduce him when he joins us. We'll go ahead and get started. And I'd like for Rachel, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. So, hi everybody, my name is Rachel Wright Jones. I have a PhD in special education. I actually started my own business. So I live in Wisconsin. I came up here and I was running a small nonprofit school for students with autism in the area that served as an alternative placement. And so I was having a hard time with getting kids transitioned back into more natural settings. So I decided to start a business and tackle it the other way around and boost and promote inclusion. I started that about 6 weeks before COVID hit. So then everything changed just like for everybody else. So, but I work with a contract with school districts. It was definitely a challenge to get going, but the school districts right now that I'm working with contract me. I definitely help promote routines is a big one, and independence in routines. I also do a lot with digital literacy skills, which came into play quite a bit during the pandemic. And so I kind of troubleshoot things as needed, and that's my role now. It's a lot of fun. Every day is a little different. So.
All right, and another panelist who's here is Zellanye Hutchins.
Hello, everyone. I am Zellanye Hutchins, and I am in Tallahassee, Florida with Leon County Schools. I actually work at a center school, and I serve right now students with autism and intellectual disability who just happen to have a few behavior challenges as well. This is my 28th year teaching, so I am a career special education teacher and I love what I do.
Wonderful. And I'm also very proud to say that Zellanye is a student and getting her ed specialist degree at Florida State. And so I've been very privileged to get to know her better over the past year. So our first question for the panelists, just so we get to know them a little bit better, is will you describe your current role and how you support secondary students? Sort of like what's the delivery format, especially since it is during COVID. So what's it been like? And if it's been different over the course of the year, you know, how have you been supporting them? And we'll go in the same order. So Rachel and then Zellanye.
Sure. So I do a lot, like I said, with routines and independence. I did that before COVID and certainly now. I do a lot of in vivo coaching with staff. So the model that I work with is I push into the school or into the transition post-high kind of programs that different area districts have set up. And I work on pushing independence in routines, the digital literacy skills. I do a lot with vocation and job skill training. So I have been able to continue some of the job sites. Unfortunately, several of the ones that we had just up and running in the very beginning of last year, obviously had to stop. But I do a lot in person, much more in person support than I do, or that I did virtually, I'll say, although I'm doing that a lot more now. And that's kind of what I do troubleshoot with behaviors, as Eleni said as well. Those are the type of students that I normally would get to work with. But I have a lot of fun. I don't know. Is there more specific that you want from me, Jenny? No? Okay.
All right. So as for my setting, I am in a classroom that's slated for intensive behavior support. So at this point in time, I have all levels except for pre-K. So I have elementary, middle school, high school, and post-secondary students all in one setting. But since we're talking about secondary students today, I'll focus on them. Of my secondary students, I have, they were all virtual at the beginning of the year. And one of them lives in a group home. And so he hasn't been able to return to school yet, but he was my pretty active digital student. And then I had one that was at home with family, who was also active in the digital format. And then I had another one that was home with family that felt like home was not for school. So that's been challenging. At the beginning of the year, as I said, all of my secondary students were digital. And what I did at the beginning of school, my school district allowed our paraprofessionals to come in and train with us a couple of weeks, which wound up being a really great thing, because within 2 weeks of school starting, I myself contracted COVID. So I had to leave my classroom in the hands of my paraprofessionals, but because we had done the training and the role plays and all that with the Zoom calls, they actually were able to carry on some digital lessons with the kids in my 14-day absence, which I thought was phenomenal. But as far as, so what our day looks like is we start out the day doing a one-on-one IEP time with our students, and then they take a break, come back for special area, and then we do a whole group. So it's synchronous with them, digital and my students that I have in the classroom. We do that in the afternoon for science and social studies. So that's kind of what it's been like for us.
Oh, that's a lot. Thinking about how like the routines and the needs, everything has just been totally different from what any of us thought of this time last year, right? I don't know about any of you, but as sort of the anniversary of the world changing comes up, you know, it's just been interesting. So leads to my next question of how are the students that you work with, how are their needs different this year than in the past? So how has this year changed what their needs are? And then because of their needs changing and because you two are phenomenal educators, what successful strategies have you found to address those needs?
Yeah, so I will say that I did find with COVID, there were some advantages for the population that I work with that started to come out, things that I don't know that I could replicate again. But especially looking at the fact that, especially with the transition aged kids, so where I am in Wisconsin, that's the 18 to 21 programs that are usually housed outside of their school district anyway, but still run by the public school district. What ended up happening was these students that are getting ready to approach graduation, they all of a sudden found themselves in the situation of what their life was probably going to look like 3 or 4 years from now when they don't have any services. And it was like, oh, like we just simulated the drop off, so to speak, because now you don't have your one-on-one aid and you don't have all your supports and you're at home. And it was that moment of like the light bulb and like, let's do it. Like, what can we do about this? Because this is how your life's going to be if we can't get in it and fix it. And then when we started, and I'll say every district that I work in had different protocols for reentering. Most of them had some sort of a VIP service delivery model, so I could get in that way with really small numbers. But then I was having students that had access to either a job site or their school building where there was no people. So we could go in and reestablish those routines really well. And then where I had students that were in a job site placement, for example, like a hotel, They had so many more protocols in place. So the structures were there, the visual supports were there. I found that it was really very advantageous for some of the population that I worked with to kind of get back in and get their skills back up to critical mass before we had the re-entry of all the other people coming in. And that's really worked. I also found that some of the students where I push independence, and that's my huge soapbox all the time, that there were still things that I was doing for them without thinking about it. And those holes got all exposed. I mean, because then we were just separate. And so what are we going to do? But things that I would never have asked them to do, like managing multiple devices at the same time, even managing multiple tabs on your browser. I had gone through and eliminated a lot of that stuff just to keep the cognitive load down, right? And keep it very clear. I was so impressed with the majority of students and being able to be way more flexible on those kind of things than I expected. And in a lot of ways, like, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, even though I was still surprised that really the rigidity was more on the staff than the students. But they were able to really pick up some of those skills. And I found that generalization was even easier. So things like doing, the laundry at school or in their program where they had the one laundry, facility. Okay, so can we manage where we're doing some kind of a virtual instruction lesson and you have a device and you're taking pictures of yours at home or whatever, the laundry facility is that you have access to. Now let's look and let's see, can we make comparisons? Like, that's something we could always do. We weren't forced to do it. And now we were forced to do it. And so it was really able to promote some generalization with skills. I also saw that students preferred the virtual format in a lot of ways and started to go into their own breakouts or meet each other for lunch, where this was not something we would have seen in a real life setting. And so that's kind of the part that I'm working with now, and how can we get ahead of that, and how can we continue to use some of these advantages of this horrific pandemic that was awful for everyone to keep some of these things in place, I think is where my brain is right now, for sure. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. No, I was. But that's really cool. Some good things came out of it for you. As for me, my students, so the dynamics are a little different. As I said before, I found early on that my student in the group home seemed to be missing that high quality interactions that he was provided with at school. And so he was having quite a few behavior issues. And so one of the things that I did early on was actually went to my church and copied curriculum for him because I didn't want to come to the school, but copied curriculum for him. And I prepared for him an AM schedule and a PM schedule just to keep him engaged and motivated. And so the staff there told me that his behavior challenges decreased as a result of actually having some type of structured work environment. And so that worked out well for him. One of the challenges that we continue to have is wanting our students to be in an environment that's conducive for instruction. So it's been really difficult to have them in a place where it's quiet, especially the one at the group home. Lots of loud background noises. Some of the technology hasn't held up. Our school district also provided him with a mobile hotspot. And even with that, sometimes he wasn't able to connect to our Zoom calls and things like that. So we had those type of challenges to endure during this time. As far as successful strategies that I used, I talked about the schedules. And I talked about the individual Zoom meetings we had for the IEP portions. And then also one of the students had Skype. So that also gave him an opportunity to reach out in a less structured way. And so we were able to play Uno with him over Skype because that was one of the things he really enjoyed at school. And so we were able to maintain that 2 times a day, reinforcing him for coming to class. And then we would play Uno at the end, once at lunchtime and one at the end of the day. I saw parents and caregivers empowered to be involved in their child's education, you know, a lot of times parents, you know, send their kids and they are so trusting that we'll do what we feel is best for them. But because of the digital format, then caregivers had to be involved and had to come in and help out with their kids. So it's been good for us to see them and then for them to see what instruction has been like for their kids. So we've been able to maintain a really good, strong rapport with our parents and all. I've also had to implement like some token boards and those type of things to keep the kids engaged. So my one student that felt like home was not for school, he has been willing to come and do about 3 things each day, which is great because before he was refusing to do anything at all. So those are just a few strategies that we use during this time.
Yeah, and I think some of us have had to adjust to that as well, right? That like my bedroom is not for work, but now it is, and teaching and everything else, you know. So that leads to then I'm sure some of these strategies were things that you've sort of had in place, especially in your 28 years. Zelny, I'm sure it's not your first time using a token board, but what changes have you made to your instruction or the support approaches as a result of COVID? Or are there things that you're doing or thinking about differently that you'll continue? And I think, Rachel, you started kind of to talk about this. So what will you continue doing once the pandemic is over, or that you just think have changed the way you're thinking about the way you support students?
Yeah, I definitely thrive on the creative problem solving approach, and I do really like technology. And so once kind of after that initial shock of COVID happened, everybody went home, and then they were starting to go, okay, like we still have to serve kids. Like what are we doing here? I got calls pretty quickly because I'm known in this area for being somebody that's really into technology, you know, and so. On one hand, it was kind of nice because I was like, oh, and I'm not just the crazy person that's, you know, dragging around all this crazy technology all the time, which I've always been. And I'm happy to be that person, but now it's kind of needed. I think there was a lot more buy-in. So even with that routine, I feel like there was a lot more buy-in into functional routines in general. I think, like Zellany was saying, with the reinforcement has been really difficult to do virtually for some students, but being able to tag team that as a team and think it through and be creative on how can we do this? How can we still provide these opportunities and still do it? I think has been fantastic. But taking those routines out of maybe the one setting and making them, you know, how can we adjust them so they would fit in another setting? Even things like, let's still practice with our phones, clocking in and out to group meeting like you would at a job site. Those kind of things I think are going to be things that stick. I hope they certainly will for me. Also, just in general, the digital literacy skills. So no more do you have somebody sitting next to you that can send an email that says you're having problems, or can pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm not feeling well today. Like there was a lot more of that responsibility piece that again, I didn't even realize I was sort of inadvertently trying to avoid for students preemptively that just got exposed. It just was, you know, out on the table that I feel like I dinged myself a little bit to say like I didn't give them enough credit, and I should have, because they really did rise to this occasion, and they often will come up with their own solutions. And so when I talk with teams too, I'm saying, you know, don't go home and just digitize your entire world. There's no need to do that, but having students be responsible for helping you generate content. Right, it takes the load off the educator. It also teaches the independence and digital literacy skills. Can we keep going that way instead of having so much weight on the educator or on the para, that there's not room for that sort of group to grow together? I think that that's something that I will continue to try and push as well, and that they can do it. So.
I started using Google Slides. I think I probably used them in class first at FSU, but then I'm like, oh, I can do this in my own classroom. And so I did use Google Slides. And so I've enjoyed using that and it's great because we have the students that are here and then the students at home when we're doing our afternoon synchronous sessions to be able to use that. So we'll continue to use that because it's easy and it's interactive. One of the things that I also will continue doing is using my Canvas pages. And so families that are at home, they can just go to our homepage, and I put lots of buttons on there for all the different curricula and different things for them to access that way. And that'll be something that I'll continue doing as well. All of our students receive Chromebooks. So while I'm not really crazy about them because they don't have touch screens, and so some of our students is difficult for them to access that type of technology without touch screens and all. But we will be continuing to use them for individualized lessons and things like that. Also, I'll continue to prepare my staff to carry on in the case of my absence and all. So all those are things that I will carry forward into the years long, along with all the things that we were already doing. We are very structured as far as our daily routines and things like that, so that we have predictability and the kids can kind of, feel less anxious for that. So we'll continue doing those type of things as well.
Great. Well, so I'm fantastic hearing from Rachel and Zellanye and your perspectives. I want to open it up to the whole group to see if there are any questions that you all have for either Rachel or Zellanye or both. So does anybody have a question they'd like to ask?
I have a question.
Yeah.
For Rachel. So you were saying that, so you're working with young people kind of ages 18 to 21.
Correct.
And you said something about that you work with students that have some pretty challenging behavior at times. And so what is your hope of outcomes for them?
Yeah, my hope of outcomes is that they can live the most independent life as possible. And also contribute to society and live, have a meaningful life. I really am pushing for inclusion. So when it comes up with those challenging behaviors, I'll give an example. I got called for a student who is very pleasant for the most part. They wanted me to teach him how to wear a mask, right? Early on in the pandemic, I struggled with that because I didn't think it was the shelf life of the skill of wearing a mask, I didn't think was gonna actually exceed the amount of time I was gonna put into teaching to wear a mask. I was a little late to the game because we're still here a year later wearing masks. But for example, they were very concerned he wouldn't wear a mask, so he wasn't gonna be able to come back into the general population. And when he did, then I realized that I'd never met this student before, but he was spitting, which the mask would help, but also would sometimes urinate on himself when he was angry and those kind of things. And so, reframing teams is what I feel like I'm really good at, to be like, hey, this is a pleasant kid, but these two things are gonna really severely impact his ability to be included in the community. I do like having some of the more assembly type jobs, and those were easier to kind of bring back into their homes, especially. So if they had some kind of job site stuff that they were doing that was assembly type stuff, could that be delivered at their house and keep that going? And I found that their productivity has really gone up in some cases in that doing it at home. Others, it's been a disaster, obviously. But, I still want them to be included. So whatever that looks like for them, that's the push that I'm going for. And so if it's somebody that's really struggling with swearing, looking at an environment where we could place them in a job that swearing may not be the least appropriate thing, right? We're looking at a warehouse or a loading dock or somewhere where you're gonna maybe fit in if you swear like a sailor. That's kind of what I'm doing. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Yes. Thanks.
Yeah. I'm going to keep talking. I don't know. I feel like there's been a lot more room for that digital stuff too, like even capturing environments. So I do a lot with augmented reality or virtual reality, but also just capturing environments with a 360 camera. And could the kids watch it on Google Cardboard just to remember what it's like to have those sounds and sights, you know, of going to the laundry facility or going into a public space and having them, you know, keep practicing doing that. That was a strategy that I think probably is going to be really beneficial moving forward, just with transportation problems and all the job site issues. Could we continue to practice that and do it virtually?
So Rachel, I have a question for you. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over Scott.
I have a question. I represent Neurodiversity Consulting. We also have a podcast, Life Fantastic, which I'll be going to next. But one question for Zellanye, you mentioned that it's hard to access, you know, without the touchscreen technology with Chromebooks. Obviously, I mean, there must be some reason, because I don't know why they can't access or make them, due to the ADA, why can't they allow it so that the students can access it? Where if they like touchscreen, they should have touchscreen. I'm new at a lot of this stuff. It's just an outsider viewpoint, but I just wanted to see what your thoughts were.
I agree with you 100%. We as a school, we received the same Chromebooks as the other school districts. And when we, you know, asked about it being touchscreen, they just told us that they didn't have touchscreen. Some of my students can use mice to access the computer, but then I have some that don't use mice at all. But that is a good question. And perhaps I can pursue that line with my supervisors in my school district.
Because I'm a Toastmaster, and obviously I understand it's important to try to educate, because I was mainstream, but for the first 7 or 8 years, I was with the Henry Viscardi School in Albertson, New York, due to major learning disabilities and trying to get myself acclimated to the world. I had to be walked through the whole development process. It didn't come naturally to me because a portion of my brain wasn't developed, and now I can talk and everything else and can be a pest sometimes. But it's just a thought that they should allow, you know, some, and it's not that much more. I don't think they should be flexible and say who we get, and that would get them much more independent, because a lot of society has ATMs and other things that you have to touchscreen. And if you need that, and also when you order some food, you have to do that. Or, I mean, they're not going to be paying by credit card, but I mean, some of them might be able to, and you have to put the card in the right way. You have to hit a password, etc. So society does have that need.
Yes, those are very good points.
Yeah, you bring up good points about, you know, universally designed technology.
Mm-hmm.
So Jill, did you have a question?
Yeah, so Rachel, you mentioned some of your students are doing better at home, or, you know, in the virtual setting. And I do have a couple students, upper high school age or post-high. I have one student who says, I love being at home and doing everything digitally, and I've been waiting for this pandemic my whole life. And for him, it's awesome. But my concern is, you know, as much as we can adapt and keep some of those virtual pieces for him, he is now really reluctant to go back out into the world, and he sees no point of going back to school or trying to do a job shadow or explore careers in the public setting. So I almost feel like I have to scale back from that somehow, and I have to reintroduce the world, and it kind of, like you were saying, kind of prioritize, you know, what can we keep digitally and how can we find a good work environment for them. But do you see that with any of the individuals that you work with? And do you have any thoughts or plans for getting those kids back out into the world and the community for whom virtual learning has been really great for them.
Yeah. Hi, by the way. So yes, that's definitely coming up. And the nature of what I do, I feel like I'm talking very generically because every situation that I'm involved in is so specific that it's really hard to talk about just one student or all of them either way. But the students that I have that were reluctant to go back, and in Wisconsin right now, at least in Dane County where I am, they have started to rephase. Most of them had some kind of VIP service available for certain students with IEPs or specific needs that they couldn't be virtual. But now they're phasing in. So those students that were doing fantastic, I do think are the students that obviously have that big challenge of the social interaction skills, right? So they're flourishing at home, they're happy. So what's the point? Those students, when I'm having them go back, we're starting to like fade things over. So for example, a student who has been able to chat in Zoom to the teacher directly or say, I need a break or those kind of things, like even just keeping just the chat. So like, can he still use an iPad to chat to his teacher in the class of 5 kids? There's not very many people in one room here. But for some reason that requesting a break was a problem with it was a card. It was a problem when it was a high five. It was a problem all the time. And it's not a problem anymore. So let's see if we can keep that piece, that one piece to get that motivation to go back into the setting. The other thing that I've been kind of successful with, and I will say that I use Judy Endo a lot as a resource, but especially how she thinks. So helping them reframe it of all this time that you have at home that you get to just kind of be in your best self place where you're accessing everything online and you feel like you're in control of your environment. Can we say that that's like building your threshold so that when we do go out, we're going to really like emphasize you're going to have all your abilities to focus in on your social time, and then it will be no digital time. And it seems like that piece in and of itself. So if you leave your control center, epicenter of technology to go into the real world, that division seems to be easier for some of these students to just make like, I know now that I'm going to focus on being social and I don't have to do so many things at once. It's kind of helped compartmentalize a little bit. I definitely see that's a problem, but I'm also looking in terms of just the workforce in general. For example, my husband's an accountant. He didn't have an office pre-COVID. He went from place to place. He's been very productive. They have zero intention of continuing back in person, and so it's kind of one of those things like, well, I mean, maybe some of this won't be as important as it was, but you still need to know how to manage yourself and be around people, right? And get some enjoyment, particularly social enjoyment, maybe out of interaction. So can we just focus on that and drop all the other stuff? I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it's good. And I think that speaks to that sensory or that social piece. I think the other part for some of my students is the sensory piece of being around people and being in the community. At home, they can control all of that sensory piece.
Right.
And so, yeah, but I'm liking what you're saying, and I'm thinking maybe we work to focus on managing the sensory environment and managing the social environment separately and kind of then bring those skills together as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a good, I've even thought, when Zellanye said everyone, and because I'm obviously in the same area, there's been such an uptake of technology, and I think that uptake was painful in some ways of we had to rapidly grow and change, but now we have it. And so I think that ability to have those accommodations of, can we put that into IEPs that when the student can chat with the teacher, can have Zoom open all day and can advocate for themselves that way, or can chat with, so I see there being a lot of benefits to that. One question from Scott in the chat, Rachel, if you can clarify what is VIP, or I couldn't tell if you're saying VIP as far as you're saying that some of the schools in your area were providing for students.
Yeah, it's just an acronym they're using in this area. So it's VIP, like a very important person, but it stands for virtual in-person students. And that's the particular demographic of kids that either had some kind of challenge at home that they weren't able to access virtual, or the extensive support needs kind of type of students. Zellanye, are they doing that in Florida as well?
I'm sorry, say that again.
They have some kind of a like hierarchy of who was able to receive in person first in Florida as well.
As far as school attendance, it was a parental choice. So it was strictly parental choice. And so, you know, as a teacher, of course, I didn't have a choice really. Because I'm at school, so my kids have to be at school, kind of thing. So that's how they did it here in our school district.
Wow. That's really interesting about Missouri. Do you mind, are you able to expand on that and tell us a little bit more about what's happening there?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is LaTanya Gillis. I am the Director of Educational Services / principal at a private agency called Milestones Academy, and we're under the behavioral health umbrella. And so this is a new position for me, but I've been in the field of special education since 1996. So it's that Form G kind of allows for, you know, us to do some different things on the virtual realm for our students with disabilities here in the state of Missouri. So the other thing that Missouri has done as well is we no longer really have the traditional snow days. So you know, districts, they've gotten really creative. So there are some teachers who, like my teachers here at Milestones Academy, who will, they will run a concurrent session with their students in person, as well as a virtual session. And so we're on a hybrid schedule due to the pandemic. So we have a population size of about 55 students, ages 5 through 21 with intellectual disabilities, and or, you know, on the autism spectrum, if you will. So it's worked well. We've had a lot of challenges with it, but the Form G does allow for that in the state of Missouri. Now, Kansas is our neighbor. I don't think Kansas has like a Form G, but they use something a little different.
Interesting. All right. Do others have either questions or comments, things they want to share about how either challenges they've had to supporting secondary students, or things they want to share that they have found successful?
I can share an additional challenge that I'm having, working towards transition planning in the virtual realm. Is posing a bit of a challenge. I don't have access to my student to observe, but it's even difficult to do his transition assessment with him right now, because he knows how to use his Chromebook, and so he will leave class when he's supposed to be in class and things like that. And I think because he has this huge history of behavior challenges, there may not be accountability for him in his setting. And so it's kind of like he's kind of in control, really. So if he wants to be there, he's there. But then if he doesn't really want to be there, then, you know, he has that choice. And especially with him being 18, he does have some choices about his life and that kind of thing. But that's a big challenge for me right now.
Yeah, I will second that for sure. It's very, very frustrating to have a student who just logs off and then you can't really contact them at all, which has been rough. What I've been doing for myself, I don't think it's helpful to the student, but for myself is I just continue and then I record what I'm saying and then I send it to them. Like, I know there's probably not oversight, but with the idea that they have to watch it later, just to keep bothering them because it's the best I can do. And then I give my best lesson ever because I'm talking to nobody, and I like to watch it later and then I critique it on myself. But it's hard. I don't have a good solution for the oversight. Best case scenario, I can text a caregiver or parent or somebody who's in the house. I also sometimes can drive to the house so I can kind of like knock or talk through the windows. I've done a lot of Zooms from a student's driveway, like literally we're kind of looking at each other and I'm in the car.
This is Lynn. One thing that I was working with a student who was having a lot of trouble, and we did kind of a differential reinforcement schedule where we bring in their special interest at different times, and they never knew when we were going to be able to talk about the thing that they loved. So they went at the beginning, like when we would do it when we were about to lose him, like we knew how long he'd hang with us, and then we would do that, and then we would try to stretch it a little longer, and if we lost him, then we knew we had to do it earlier next time. But really bringing in their special interests in some times where he would be able to do something that he enjoyed was one way that we got some to linger a little longer.
And I think it was in Judy Endo's book, The Hidden Curriculum of Getting and Keeping a Job, but she stressed the importance of mentors. So in the districts I work with, we've been really trying to foster mentor relationships between the young adults with autism, not only for work, but for social life, because, you know, they're going to need to talk to someone when they're out on their own about dating and driving and navigating the community and all of those things that, you know, we kind of sort of prepare them for, but, you know, they're going to need like a life coach or some advice. And so for the students for whom we had already started to help them develop mentor relationships or had focused on, you know, that process of finding and developing a mentor for different aspects of their life, that was really helpful. And I think, you know, Rachel, like you were saying, the pandemic kind of brings up the gaps in things, but it also let us know we were kind of on the right track, because having a mentor for various aspects of your life, it you know, is really helpful when you're faced with a sudden change, and the pandemic was a sudden change. And so for our students who had someone outside of family and school that they could talk to and relate with, it really kind of helped solidify that, yeah, this is a good thing. And it's okay for me to get advice from other people, because that's what everybody in the world does. That's kind of why we're all here today, sharing ideas and getting advice. And so I think that's been really helpful.
Yeah, that is good.
Yeah, there's a really great suggestion in the chat about how we've been able to, a benefit has been that we've been able to see what strategies work for individuals in their home, and then how can we maybe, you know, bring those in. So you've given me lots of ideas now about that mentoring and how can we, and that also can also seen as a way of inclusion. And so how can we find mentors? And I'm even thinking, Zellanye, in our own community of college students, have access to a lot of them, who can compare maybe with some of these individuals to give them, and they're their same age peers. So.
I think it would help too if it's just not happening just to me, right? It's hard when mom and dad say they're frustrated, your teachers are frustrated because they can't get their technology to work or whatever it is, but it's different when it's a peer mentor or somebody else. I didn't mean to cut you off, Zellanye.
That's okay. I was going to say that in years past, we did have this organization called Best Buddies. Yeah. And those were college students that would come in and be buddies to our kids. We also have in the summers here at my school something called peer volunteers. And so these are, once again, same age kids, but they're like grade school kids. So they can start as early as 3rd grade, and then they can volunteer with another group of kids here that's in the 3rd grade. So they don't have to wait until they're teenagers to have peer buddies. They can have peer buddies all the way beginning like at 3rd grade. And so there are some students from other schools that have been here like every summer from 3rd grade until the time they graduate from high school. And so that's been kind of cool. And I was able to bring my youngest child over. He couldn't wait to come and volunteer. I have 6 kids and they've all come through and volunteered during the summer. So he was like, I can't wait till it's my turn. And he formed a relationship with one of my students, which I'm hoping is going to be one of those lifetime relationships. And so they've gotten, they were able to hang together outside of the school setting and that kind of thing. So that's kind of cool.
How you find your future special educators too through that's how I started in the 3rd grade.
Anyone else? Any other things that have been particularly difficult or that have strategies that have worked well for you all during this time?
This is Lynn. I just want to say how much I appreciate the strategies that we got here. Even I had never thought, Rachel, about like drive to and get that, contact and sit in the car in the driveway. I mean, such a simple thing that people just never think about. I think that was brilliant. So I'm really excited to tell this person that I've been working with, this teacher, have you thought about driving over there and having a little face-to-face through the window in the front living room in your car type of thing. And I just think that's just a brilliant idea.
Stay warm. It's very cold now.
Yeah, it might be more feasible in Florida than in Wisconsin right now.
One of the things that I did particularly enjoy, and it coincides also with being back at Florida State and using one of the curriculum that Dr. Root suggested for us, but it also came in like a PDF. And so when I had one student that actually contracted COVID as well, just last month. And so I was able, once he, was feeling okay, I was able to continue his reading instruction and everything using those resources. So he didn't have to, lose ground or regress or anything like that. It was a little bit different at home, of course, but he was still able to keep on track. And so he was able to come right back and move on to the next level, which was really exciting for me. So being able to have the resources in different formats has been a real plus.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth, that's great to hear about that your son's theater teacher's been using those peer breakouts or the breakout rooms for rehearsing lines. And so I think I've had some other friends give feedback on the use of breakout groups, and that some students who may have been nervous in class having class discussions have actually found the breakout groups more of a comfortable setting and have developed some social relationships that they did not in like traditional class settings. So I don't know if that was the case for your son or not, but that kind of goes back to how for some learners they've really thrived in this setting, whereas, for others of us, it's been tough.
I have a question for Zellanye. So you mentioned using Google Slides. So are you using it through Classroom?
No, I just have my own a Classroom Google account, but I don't use Google Classroom. They told us that it might like eat up our bandwidth or something like that when we're using like the Bitmoji classrooms and all that stuff. So we all, like most of us on my campus, created a Bitmoji classroom, but I don't really use it like that. So for this week, I was teaching social studies. And so I put my task analysis on the Google slide, along with the options for students to ask questions and answer their questions and that kind of thing. And so they were able to just go up and move their questions and answers to the right spot on the task analysis. And my virtual student was able to see his questions and answers and stuff too. The bad thing for us is that with the Chromebooks here again, there's no remote control. So whereas he could, if they had remote control for Zoom, like if they would update with that version of Zoom, then the students could use that remote control to have more opportunity to engage. But we kind of just make the best of what we have. So,
Sure.
yeah.
So when they're using the slides, then are you having everybody contribute to one copy, or does everybody have their own copy?
Everybody has a copy. Yeah, they all have their own. And so usually in my afternoon groups, we're all kind of gathered around our interactive board, kind of sort of, but then my in-person students also have Chromebooks as well. I just typically don't have everybody join in because with the audio, it just kind of bounces all over the place if we're all in the same room, kind of thing. But we play with the some. We'll probably tweak it a little more as time goes on to see, but it's a challenge too, I think, for them to always engage just looking at the screen as opposed to looking at, people.
Right.
Yeah.
That engagement piece has been tough, right? You got to keep them. What are they going to do? What are they going to do? How are they going to respond?
Yes.
Yeah, Lynn mentioned Nearpod. I haven't use Nearpod, but Addie McConomy, one of my my doc students, is like a Nearpod whiz, and so she has been sort of teaching me and us how to use that as a interactive way, and it seems like a way to really control like what students see versus when you like give them a presentation, they can't advance on their own, rather. So you control what they see and you can embed activities within it. So it's a pretty neat tool.
Boom Cards is another one that I've played with. It's free. Of course, it's better if you pay for it, but.
And we use Boom Cards a lot here at our school too. So it's really successful. And then we push a lot of stuff through Seesaw to our families. Yeah.
And I see Ruth has also used Nearpod. And then Jamboard is kind of, I would say that's my jam. So, but similar to Google. So Jamboard is just another Google product. So I use it like a digital response board, digital whiteboard. All right, well, I think we have time for one more question if anyone has one, a question or a comment. All right, well, thank you everybody for chatting with us. This is my favorite thing to do once a month on Friday afternoons. And so I'm looking forward to our next chat is going to be on, let me open up my calendar. I'm pretty sure it's March 19th because we did not want it to interfere with CEC. And so, yep. March 19th will be our next, and the topic is advocacy. And so we have some self-advocates with intellectual disability and autism and their parents and a couple parents as well. And so that should be a great topic. Same Zoom link, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. And so thanks everybody for joining us. Hope you all have a wonderful Valentine's Day weekend.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.